Final Fantasy VII Rebirth has the opportunity to do something really special. Let's talk about it. Have you ever noticed that some of the most popular and most well-beloved games of all time happen to be sequels? No, seriously, think about it. Halo 2 and 3, Mass Effect 2, The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim, not Spyro. But speaking of, Spyro 2, Gears of War 2, not Dark Souls 2. And do you also notice that some of the games that get the most hype and publicity also happen to be follow-ups or sequels, like Spider-Man 2, God of War Ragnarok, The Witcher 3, stuff like that? You start to notice a trend there? Well, sequels can breed a lot of hype because it's a proven concept. If the base game was really good, then people are more likely to look forward to a game that is supposed to improve on those core elements about what people really enjoyed from the base game. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth seems to be no exception to this idea. Now, why is that? Well, let's talk about the concept of sequels, how to execute them, and why Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is shaping up to be an excellent example of that from the information we have available to us right now. As always, wait for launch, be a smart consumer, but let's talk about it. Now, Final Fantasy VII Remake was pretty damn successful, and overall well received. It was a bit polarizing because of some purists for the original game. However, most of the people, in my experience, who played Final Fantasy VII Remake really ended up liking it and loved what it did to the game. It had fun combat, a great story, was beautiful to look at, and really characterized certain characters that were a little bit lacking in the original game and upped it all. It just felt like the Midgar section from Final Fantasy VII was fleshed out and given even more love. And while there were a few moments in the game that felt kind of like filler or just overall fluff, the game as a whole did an excellent job of taking a section from the original game that lasted you like maybe 5 hours or so, and blowing it up to a 40-hour experience. There was some great comedy, some great emotional moments. It was just an overall well-packaged experience that was let down in a few key areas, like the side questing being kind of, well, side quests, and not having a lot of mini-games. But Integrate did kind of fix that, at least with Fort Condor, which I really enjoyed personally. And some of the other kind of mini-games, like, going to the gym and being a gym bro, was like locked to, well, a side quest, or was very quick to pursue and to maximize, and to essentially complete. Rebirth seems to be taking those elements of what was lacking in Remake and amplifying it to 11. Now, why is that? Well, one main piece of content, the Gold Saucer. The Gold Saucer, for those who didn't play the original Final Fantasy VII, was essentially this giant, Las Vegas tower in Final Fantasy VII that had a bunch of minigames associated with it. It was a big, happy-go-lucky, fun time, golden neon lights and all that, drawing you in and providing a wealth of multiple different side content and mini-games to pursue at your own leisure if you wanted to pursue them to break up the flow and monotony of the main story. If you could like those pieces of content, you could pursue it and really do a good number on it. Like chocobo breeding to get better chocobos, to race chocobos, or driving sections or whatever. Gold Saucer had quite a few differentiating aspects to it that broke up the flow of gameplay. The Gold Saucer is returning in Rebirth, and we got a sneak peek at some of the freaking mini-games associated with the Gold Saucer in Rebirth through the trailer. So we saw boxing, we saw driving, we saw chocobo racing, we know there's some kind of mechanic to go out and collect more chocobos. So the side content in Rebirth seems like it's going to be a step up from Remake. That's only step 1 though, and side content does not a sequel make. So what is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth changing about the core experience and core loop of Final Fantasy VII Remake to really differentiate it and feel like a fleshed out experience? Well, the combat's kind of revamped, but it's still the same old Remake combat that you either loved or didn't like. I personally loved it. I love that idea of emulating the kind of feel turn-based combat could have with the ATB mechanic. I just thought when you're not utilizing the ATB system, or you're still trying to build up to it, it felt a little bit spammy. So what does Rebirth do? Well, gives you parry and dodge baseline, dodge is called warp, and unlocks synergy abilities so that each party member in your party has unique attacks that it can utilize with the other party members. and these change depending upon who you are controlling. So if you're controlling Cloud, your synergy ability with Tifa would be different than if you were controlling Tifa using a synergy ability with Cloud. And you build up to these synergy attacks by utilizing ATB spending abilities, or something a little bit more nuanced than that, but that's kind of like the rough idea of it. The world seems far more open, not a complete open world, but at least far more open than in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, this is important in my opinion. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Midgar was constituted on a bunch of hallways. And that was important, because when you got into the open world of Final Fantasy VII, you had that big moment of, oh, I no longer am limited to hallways and corridors. I have an entire world to explore at my own leisure, and I can go in whatever direction that I want to. It gave you that sense of immersion that you've just stepped out into the world. It was storytelling through the gameplay. But in Final Fantasy VII Remake, the entire game took place in Midgar, and whether or not it was for the best or not, they tried to emulate that idea that everything felt like a freaking corridor. Everything was a hallway, or a glorified hallway. Even the towns and cities were constituted based on just going down certain streets or not. You never really had an area that was a little bit more wide open that you could explore. There was still some exploration in Remake, but it was mostly just navigating more hallways. Rebirth is not doing that. I'm sure it will have some hallways, but from the footage we've seen and the gameplay, like the 10 minutes of gameplay we got from IGN, which is probably playing right now, some of these open world-ish areas are far more open. And that's cool, because it gives you a breath of fresh air. It mixes the gameplay loop up, and allows you to explore the world and go for collectibles or side quests at your own pace, in your own direction. Because the game is also giving you multiple new forms of navigation. You have chocobos, you have vehicles. You can utilize these tools to navigate the world. It's not going to be like an open world like Final Fantasy 15, at least from my understanding, but probably something more akin to Final Fantasy 16. Again, don't quote me on that, but the world seems decently big enough. It also seems like they're trying to shove world building and characterization in a lot more places than they were in the original. You don't really have like a Bioshock, or not Bioshock, but BioWare-esque codex system, but what you have is this like AI companion that apparently follows you around, where if you're fighting a certain mob or you're engaging in a certain side quest, it'll give you a little bit of lore about that monster. It helps flesh out the world a little bit. I do wonder how annoying that character or companion can be later on in the game, but it's something to wait and see. Now, I think one of the strongest elements of Final Fantasy VII Remake compared to the original Final Fantasy VII is just the methods of storytelling that Remake had at its disposal. The voice acting, at least in English, was incredible. It's some of my favorite voice acting I've ever heard in a game. It was fun and dynamic, and it was able to utilize the modern graphics and visual effects to amplify the goofiness and silliness and even the emotional moments of the base game and of these individual story moments. It had great camera work, lighting, etc. Animations, facial animations, voice acting alongside it, as well as the great soundtrack that Final Fantasy VII is known for. This may affect certain people more than others, but for me, I appreciate the whole package when it comes to telling a story and conveying it. All these individual elements working together in tandem, they amplify the experience for me and make it overall better. When it comes to Rebirth, if you know the original story of Final Fantasy VII, you know some shit is gonna go down in this game. Especially with them saying that the game is going to end at the capital. Dude, I think one of the strongest elements of Final Fantasy VII Remake already was the idea that it was able to weave these really emotional moments, like Tifa crying into Cloud's arms, or the plate falling, stuff like that. It's able to convey those moments in an extremely effective manner because it's utilizing the modern tools of storytelling at its disposal. Rebirth, it seems like they're going, well, doubling down on that idea, which is a good idea because I don't think there was any real reason to change that concept or that method of storytelling. It was one of Remake's strongest features, and that's an important element when it comes to making a sequel. I'm a firm believer that when it comes to making a sequel for a game, there's two key elements to take into account. What does the game need to change, and what does it not need to change? For me, Remake's style of storytelling did not need to be changed just for the sake of changing it, and from what we've seen, they are keeping it in that style. That's a big plus for me. There's no reason to fix what's not broken. But when it comes to certain elements that could be touched up upon, like the combat loop, or the combat pacing, or a sense of openness to the world, especially for Rebirth when we're stepping out into the world proper, giving us more choice with the party, who we have in the party, synergy attacks, stuff like that, and side content, it takes what Remake did well and does it even better, or changes things up enough. So we get synergy attacks, we get parry and dodge baseline. We get the entire party at our disposal, pretty much, I think. Yuffie was a ton of fun in Intergrade. Let's bring her into the main party here and have a baseline. Okay, Final Fantasy VII base game had Yuffie and Vincent as optional characters. Well, what we can do in Remake and Rebirth is implement them as core parts of the main story. That allows us to add on to the overall narrative or change things up to better implement them into the main party. And because Remake does a really good job of characterization, we can make them lovable and we can make them fit. That's what the Remake did with Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge. 3 characters who were kind of forgettable in the original, but who really shined in Remake. Rebirth has a ton of questions associated with its overall narrative. The gameplay looks like it's going to be a step up and a great evolution on the ideas and principles of Remake. The world seems like everything I wanted out of Remake. At the end of it, side content looks like it's fleshed out and expanded on in fun and unique, interesting ways. The game just looks like a step in all the right directions. There's really nothing I can point to and say, this looks worse than in Remake, or this is not the direction I would have taken. The only thing I can think of is Rebirth not having chocobo breeding. But I need to play their alternative idea to that. We go out and collect chocobos. I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. Maybe that's even more fun and interesting than breeding chocobos, which could be a bit of a grind in the original. But the customization, the progression in Remake, and Rebirth, seems like a massive step up from what Remake had. Remake had a very simplistic progression system. You had a weapon, you utilized the weapon to get a new ability for your character, and you just took a bunch of passives in the skill tree. Or not even like the skill tree, just like, here's a list of like different cores with abilities that are just like stat increases. Pick what you want. In Rebirth, it seems like a step up in that regard, because you can like upgrade and like go down talent trees apparently for your synergy attacks, which just sounds really cool. You can customize your chocobos. You can fuse materia together. Again, great ideas that feel like Final Fantasy VII. I think that's one of the key elements of making a sequel that Rebirth is so far nailing from all appearances, and that is feeling like a step forward from the original game. You don't have to keep everything that's the same, and you don't have to change everything. Identify the weak points, strengthen them up, understand what doesn't need to be changed, keep them the same, and cut off any extra fat that's just like kinda hanging there. Rebirth looks really freaking good. I'm looking forward to it, and from what I've seen, they're doing everything that I wanted them to do. So, I'm gonna call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And please hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload and stream in the future, because I will be covering Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. You can bet your ass on that one. You can take it to the bank! And leave a comment down below with your thoughts, your opinions on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and what you are most looking forward to from what you've seen, or what you're most disappointed by from what you've seen. I would love to hear your thoughts, hear your perspectives, and hear your opinions. So stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye bye everybody, until we meet again.